Okay. Sorry, I'm a little sick, guys. It's a great way to start the semester, let me tell you. So Grasshopper, right? I mentioned that it's a plugin for Rhino. So I'll reiterate that when you want to open it up, and notice if I close it, that geometry is gone. Type in Grasshopper, it comes back up. In the same session, and what I mean by session is like I have Rhino open, I've started a session. If I close Rhino, I've closed and ended the session. So as long as I've got Grasshopper, if I'm closing it and reopening it in the same session of Rhino, all the information stays there. Something to be aware of before we get into really anything else is the files. When you save a Rhino file, and I'm just going to go to Rhino and do a file save as. I'll put it on my personal drive. I'll just leave it as untitled. No. So I've saved it. I called it untitled test. That's my Rhino file. It's a .3dm file, right? 3dm. So that file will open the live geometry that I've built in Rhino. When I want to load in a Grasshopper definition is the term for what this is, what we've constructed in here. That is a separate file. So under the same thing, it's got this little Grasshopper looking tag, unnamed test. If you look at those, new window. So we've got untitled test.3dm, and you can see down there in the preview that there's those two spheres I just constructed. It's showing me the red one because that's how it was saved. But really, it won't. Let me close it and show you. I'll close that. I'll close this. So I'll just open up that file and see how it's not there. Right. So that geometry is not there. I go to Grasshopper. And that geometry is not there, right? So I've ended the session. It means that it disconnected that file from the Grasshopper file. So I'll need to, and it gives you this nifty little thing for all your recently used files, but you just go to File, Open Document. You find the grasshopper.gh file, and then you open that, and it will load the geometry and the references that you had. Okay, so again, staying very general, that's the relationship of the two right now. So just like any other program that you use, it has your file, edit, and view, and then it's got a couple of other different things. This one is not so long as as Rhino is, because they pretty much just isolate everything into a tiered, and I say tiered because it's kind of like a pyramid, a tiered menu system. So you've got your general stuff, like if I want to view things a little bit differently, or display different types of visual settings for the workspace. And solution is like, how do you turn off that computing thing I mentioned before? But outside of that, all of your commands are in the panels that you're seeing at the top. And so to give you a sense of the way that I'm going to talk through introducing you to new commands, I want to be very clear about how I'm leading you through it, because it does get kind of crazy. So you'll see that there's this PRM, and if you hover over it, it gives you a description and it gives you an icon for all the things that are in that, and I'll call it a tab, right? So those are the tabs. That's just what I'm going to call it. So you've got params, you've got maths, sets, vectors, curves, surfaces, so on and so forth. There are a bunch of things. Some of them are transformative. Some of them are just purely based off of displaying things, if it's color or material, or analytical, arrows and stuff. And then there are some specialty ones, so paneling tools, kangaroo, and lunchbox. We'll work with those a little bit. You should be aware that there are a ton of add-ons, and a lot of them are extremely powerful. Kangaroo in particular is one that has a physics engine that's really intense. We won't use it a lot, but I'll introduce you to it. That's this one. So, like I said, those are the tabs. So when I say go to the params tab, that's what I mean. You click on params. Or if I say go to the sets tab, you click on sets, and it'll open up a new list of what I will refer to as panels. Okay, so this next little level down here, these little black bars, those are different panels. So the one that I just clicked on, that would be under the sets tab, the list panel, and then everything that you have in here is your command, okay, or your node, so to speak. So if I want to put in, list item, which we're going to use a lot, list item, I'll say go to the sets tab under the list panel and get list item, and we'll drop it in. So at a certain point, I won't need to walk you through that. I will begin by describing it every step of the way. I'll take it very slow. You'll get used to it over time, and I'll show you a nifty thing where it'll help you get used to it, but not yet. Okay, so I'm just going through this stuff right now. So let's talk real quick about what each of these types of tabs has and what their functions are. Params is a little bit of an abstract concept to you. So params, actually, I'll do it this way. So let's first talk about what I put in the workspace before I talk about any of the inputs or outputs. So this sphere node, it's basically executing a command. It executes a command by continuously reprocessing the data that you've input into it. So the input values are on the left side of the node. And you see that there are these little white, bubbles or buttons or whatever you call it, anchors on the side. That is essentially an anchor for you to input a value. And when I say value, that doesn't necessarily mean a numerical value. It could be anything. It could be a geometry. It could be a list of geometries. It could be a number. But it also could be a set of coordinates or minimum and maximum values. It's pretty all-encompassing, right? But the key is you have to know what it's asking for. And to find out what it's asking for, B and R really doesn't tell me much. I could guess and say R for radius, right, because it's a sphere, maybe. But what's B? Can you guys guess what B is? Base? Oh, that's a good guess. That's right. But yeah, so B is basically the base plane. But you don't really know too much about how it operates. So when you put the base plane in, what you're seeing is that little grid that goes in there. That's setting a plane for your geometry to be oriented. And the important thing to know about that is that when you hover over these values, it tells you what it's asking for. So when it says base plane, it says one locally defined value. So it says world XY. So it says one locally defined value means that it will put a sphere at that base plane wherever you've told it to go. And it's a little misleading that it says 1 because it could be 800,000. But essentially it's saying I'll put a sphere on any of your locally defined values. And it's going to be an X, Y, or Z point. Does that kind of make sense? You'll understand, once you see enough of them, you'll start to understand what world XY means. But right now, world XY is a default value. So if you look at where the grid is in 3D, right, so under perspective, XY, you'll see that the grid is visible in the top view. And it's not visible, it's just a line in the front view. So that just means that it's going to default to the X and Y plane. And when you start to get into modeling in Rhino, you'll really start to understand and visualize what XY plane truly means. So then, additionally, I'll just get rid of that real fast. With the radius, it looks a little bit different. Also, it says, well, it gives you the description, sphere radius. But it says one locally defined value again, 1.0. So when it says 1.0 versus world XY, you know that one of them is a plane, the other one is a numerical value, right? So you're digging some of these context clues right out of the node itself. You can hover over the the node, and get a description as well. Sometimes it's informative, sometimes it's not really. But the most important thing that you should be aware of, right? I told you this is a cyclical process. We construct and we deconstruct and we reconstruct it into something else. Well, if we just had input values, that wouldn't really be very useful to us. So we also have output values. So that radius that I put on gave me a sphere. So it takes this information, where's it going to go, how big is it, and then it gives me a sphere that is that big in that location, or those locations. Making sense? I'm taking it real slow, because it's easy to get lost with it. So that says it's an untrimmed surface. So we'll talk more about what kinds of output it'll give you. Sometimes it's trimmed, sometimes it's untrimmed, sometimes it'll be solid. And I put that in quotes because nothing is ever truly solid. You know, they can take any form as well. It could be numerical, it could be a surface, it could be a Boolean value, which is either true or false, right? So any of these things, it could, you know, it can be used to reference other processes. So generally speaking, I went really, really slow about that. I want to go through some of the tools that you're going to have and some of the visibility, and then I'll kind of refresh you when we get back into it on Wednesday. But are there any questions about that setup? This right here. Yes?
When you hover over any of the items or things, it gives you a letter in parentheses. What exactly is that for? Yeah, right there. SPH.
I never really paid that much attention to it.
Saying what the abbreviation is.
Yeah, it could just be the command shortening that, like, you drop in and says boundary. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's particularly important because some of them are really misleading. Like this one, you'll hear me griping about it quite a lot. The command is called isotrim, but when you drop it in, it says subsurf. That's really misleading to me. And it happens a lot, but you learn. That one's a really important one. We'll use it a lot. Anyway, so what are we doing on time here? Running a bit long. Okay. I should probably just stop and do another one. No, I'll do it quick. So I'm not going to totally exhaust you guys here tonight on this because you're going to forget it by Wednesday anyway. I just want you to understand the general things. So, you know, just like Rhino, curves, right? So you create curves, which are basically your linear geometry. Happens not just in 2 dimensions, but also 3 dimensions. You also have surfaces. A lot of the commands are exactly the same as you would create in Rhino. So one very powerful one is loft, and you see loft is also present right here. You see extrude quite a bit in Rhino. Extrude is right here. You'll see stuff under, I think it's under transform theme, so you can scale, you can move things around and rotate. All of these things are pretty much a direct translation from how they operate in Rhino. So as you're learning these things on the Rhino side, you'll be doing something very similar on the Grasshopper side, so to speak. Okay, so without getting too much into all the stuff here, just be aware that the idea of a param. Okay, it's the only one that I want to specially introduce to you. If I drop in a param and it says point, I click it, I drop it in, right? A point is the most basic geometry that we have, right? It doesn't occupy any space. It's just data in a three-dimensional world. It's one bit of data in a three-dimensional world. But in Grasshopper, I drop in this point, and the node has a little input and an output, which is really weird, right? I think it's really weird. You hover over it, and it doesn't really say much. It says it contains a collection of three-dimensional points. But it also says empty point parameter. So what you should know about these nodes is that sometimes they create information. Other times they only house information. And sometimes they simply modify information. And I say information because it's not just geometry. So the input would essentially be any kind of referenced points. So I can map a list of points in Rhino and then put them in here and then feed that into the sphere, and that's where I'm going to get them, all the spheres. So let me just real quick, go point and point and point, and you'll see now I can populate that either in an automated process or manually, and I'll do it manually for you real quick. Say set multiple points, and I select all of those and hit enter, and if I put that into the base point, then I have spheres on all three of those points. And furthermore, if I wanted to move that point, then it modifies it as well, or do anything to them. Okay? So, trying to keep it short and very general right now. What questions do you have? Okay, great. So you're going to be getting back into Rhino, so you're going to kind of begin to actually work in the coordinate plane and actually create geometry. So, Jeff will walk you through all that, and then we'll do something similar. I don't know if we'll actually do what you're doing tonight in Grasshopper, but what you should probably focus on is getting used to the idea of visualizing in a digital environment. So really pay attention to your orthogonal views, right? Your top view and then your front and right side views as it relates to the perspective view. So if you really focus on visualization, it'll make the rest of the semester go way smoother for you. Okay? All right. So I'll turn it back over to Jeff. I'm going to take off for the rest of the night, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Yes? Oh, okay.